welcome to Classics Confidential. Today I'm talking with Dr. David Pritchard, who's just finished a visiting lectureship at the University of Edinburgh and is on his way back to his own institution of Queensland, Australia. So David, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Tell us a little bit about what you do, what your research interests are.
Well, I'm a historian of ancient democratic Athens, and I've studied in particular the social and cultural history of democratic Athens. And so I've just finished a book on sport in the democracy, but I also have interests on the cultural history of war in the democracy and Athenian social history more generally. Right.
Well, sport, a very current topic, especially since last year we had the Olympics here in London. The interesting thing about sport, it was very popular, of course, in Athens, even though, as you write in your book, it was the elite, really, that were the top athletes of the city of Athens. So tell us a bit more about how generally a lot of elite actions were condemned in 5th century BC Athens. Sportsmen were always praised.
That's right. Well, I think in actual fact sport is an anomaly of the Athenian democracy because like other social activities, it was an activity determined by social class, and in this instance it really was the case that the wealth and time of a family determined whether a young man would practice sport. And so in the new book I show, I hope quite clearly, that was the case. In actual fact it was elite citizens who participated in athletic education and in the athletic pursuits of the city and the athletic contests like the Olympic Games which occurred elsewhere in Greece. And this is very interesting because, as you know, ancient Athens was a very democratic place where non-elite citizens really determined social mores, social values, and really the priorities of the community. So it's very unusual to find in ancient Athens that, in spite of the fact that sport was an elite activity, non-elite citizens in fact did think highly of sportsmen. They made a point of sponsoring and expanding athletic competitions at home and also giving tremendous civic honours to those citizens who had been victorious in sporting events elsewhere in Greece. So as far as I can see, athletics represents a real anomaly of Athenian democracy.
That's very interesting. Of course, sports is also linked with your other interest with war, and in your new book you talk about the link between sport and violence, and also, of course, the impact of democracy in terms of Athens's imperialistic ambitions. So tell us a bit more about this new project that you're working on.
Well, let's see. So, I mean, what's interesting about sport and war in democratic Athens is that the Athenian people conceived of sport and war in the same ways. They saw battle and athletic contest as an agon, which required arateia, excellence for victory, and sportsmen and soldiers needed to bear dangers and toils in order to be successful in their particular arena. And this is very interesting because it's here that we can actually find an explanation for the anomaly of sport in democratic Athens. There is this cultural overlap between sport and war. And the significance there is that although the demos did not practice athletics, and it was an elite activity, the demos were very keen on war. They made a point of being soldiers themselves. They saw war as a very good thing, something that realised them as men, that proved their arateia, put a spring in their step, made them happy, and so they were very keen on war. And so ordinary Athenians could actually see quite clearly that there was this overlap between sport and war. And because elite sportsmen were like them on the battlefield, elite sportsmen were like soldiers themselves, that this is why the Athenian demos saw elite sportsmen in such favourable terms. So that cultural overlap between sport and war, I think, is very interesting, and it's something that really allows us to explain the anomaly of sport in the democracy.
That's very interesting. In your new project is you explore the dark aspects of the darker aspects of the democracy, and how, as you just mentioned, it sort of gave impetus to this the instinct to war, to fight and represent your city and do well. So can you talk a bit more about that?
Well, I think this is, this is something which is very interesting about ancient Athens. I mean, normally we think of Athens as a place of democracy and high culture and drama and literature. We see the Athenians as the forebears for a sophisticated cosmopolitan culture. But we often forget that the Athenians were also very successful warriors. Athens in the 5th century was the dominant power of the Eastern Mediterranean. And then Athens in the 4th century, even after it had lost its empire, continued to be a very significant regional power. In addition, it's very clear that the Athenians were military innovators. So they were innovators in terms of politics and culture, but that same spirit of innovation also manifested itself on the battlefield as well. So this is a very interesting aspect of Athenian life. The Athenians weren't simply keen on politics and culture, but also on war. And what's even more interesting, I think, is that this Athenian success on the battlefield, this Athenian run of innovations when it came to war making, coincides with the emergence of democracy in Athens. So I think there is a very good case that it really was the democracy that was a major cause, if not the major cause, of Athenian military success and bellicosity. Often when we think about democracy, we limit ourselves to institutions, politics and the law. But democracy was much more than that for Athens. Democracy also entailed a democratisation of culture, because the public fora that produced culture in democratic Athens were indeed controlled by the demos. And as a consequence of that, the culture really reflected their points of view. The culture was very flattering about their contributions to public life. And one aspect of the democratisation of culture in classical Athens is this democratisation of war, which is very significant for the war-making of the Athenians.
In terms of the impact on culture, of course the thing that immediately springs to my mind is Greek tragedy. And of course the theme of war kind of runs through Greek tragedy in a number of key plays. Perhaps one of the most well-known, particularly today, would be Euripides' Trojan Women, where we see the sort of the impact on war, on the defeated. And some scholars have postulated that immediately translates into a sort of anti-war message in the play. Now, I don't think that's quite right, but what's your opinion of how war is represented in Greek tragedy, and how it reflects some of the themes that we were discussing?
Well, let's see, I think that tragedy reflects tragedy has a differentiated view of war per se. So tragedy is capable to think about the human costs of war. And the best example is Trojan Women by Euripides, which really, in a sense, revels in the suffering of the defeated and notes to how even Greeks can engage in war crimes if they're given an opportunity to do so. So certainly that play is very critical about war. It would have reminded the audience that war does come at a human cost. Having said that, it's far from clear that that play is itself a critique of Athenian war-making. In actual fact, in that play, Euripides is very careful to distance the Athenians in the Trojan Wars, the sons of Theseus, from the war crimes committed by the other Greeks, who seem to be in the main from Sparta. So the Athenians Euripides makes a point of distancing the Athenians in that play from the war crimes that he represents on stage. And then when it comes to other tragedies, Euripides in fact gives a very positive view of Athenian war making. So Euripides also produced plays or wrote plays like Suppliant Women, Heracles and the Children of Heracles. And these plays are really very triumphalist. These are dramatisations of the stories which the Athenians told about themselves, which showed their just war making, how they only fought wars to save people for the sake of justice. That war always resulted in good outcomes like military alliances. So while Euripides in some plays where Athenians are not prominent can criticise war and note its human costs, when Euripides represents mythical Athenians engaging in war, he presents them in a very positive manner, And this is significant because it means that tragedy is providing mythical precedents for Athenian war making. Tragedy is providing ideological cover for the Athenians in war making. And also what's significant too is that it shows us that tragedy is actually representing Athenian war making in the same way which it was represented at the public funeral for the war dead, and also probably in political discourse as well. And in both of these genres, Athenian war making was presented overwhelmingly in positive terms.
Well, I think it's very interesting that those plays are not actually very popular on stage nowadays, because, as you say, they are more triumphalist.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's the Trojan women are obviously sort of tailored to contemporary circumstances that seems to be the more popular. But of course, the sort of the mythical distance that these plays provide allow for the audience to be much more critical.
And I think that's right. So again, even when Euripides criticises war and Trojan women, there are these distancing effects. This is taking place in the distant past. It is not Athenians who are engaging in these war crimes. It happened a long time ago. And in addition, the trilogy of which Trojan women is a part, it gives it these outs as well. Look, yes, there are humans behaving badly, but they will be punished. And also, the victims of the Trojan War, in a sense, had it coming to them because they failed to obey the gods.
Of course, because in Alexander, which is the first part of the trilogy, they take Paris back. So in a way, they bring the catastrophe on themselves by taking that decision. And the prologue of the Trojan women provides the bigger picture, if you like, the fact that the Greeks themselves will be punished for their acts of hubris, for the desecration of the temples. Depending on which parts of the play you choose to focus on, and modern directors obviously can choose to cut or emphasise particular sections of the play, that plays into your interpretation of the dramatic text. But it's very interesting, I think, that the theme of war is so prevalent in Greek tragedy.
I think that's right. And look, there are a couple of things I will say there. First of all, I think Athens itself was a city which was really committed to war. It was almost obsessed with war making.
Yes.
And this is really reflected in its culture. And also, we need to be careful with a play like Trojan Women by Euripides, because this can give us the impression that the Athenians regularly spoke about the costs of war, but that doesn't appear to be the case. In actual fact, Trojan Women is quite unusual, I think, in the body of tragedies, and it's certainly very unusual in terms of discussing war, because outside of the theatre, we really have limited evidence of the Athenians engaging in a strong critique of war as an activity. Whereas in modern democracies, whereas democracies after World War I, certainly after World War II, have developed peace movements and discourses about human rights and discourses about the value of peaceful resolution of disputes rather than wars, the ancient Athenians didn't develop that discourse at all. So we make a mistake if we think the ancient Athenians, in fact, thought about war in the same way as we do. They didn't have a strong public critique of war. Rather, war was seen as, most of the time, a good thing, which men engaged in, and they did so to the benefit of themselves and the community.
Yes. No, I think it's very much a case of us reading our own concerns back onto antiquity. And also, of course, the dangers, because we have very fragmentary evidence. So we have to be careful about the conclusions we draw from that evidence. You know, as you say, Trojan women is rather unique. And I think one of the reasons is why modern directors have chosen that play to be performed again and again in times of crisis.
Indeed, and I think that's Athens is an interesting case study for us to think about, and it's interesting because there are similarities between the way that we do things and the way that the ancient Athenians do things. So we can look to Athens as for ideas for thinking about our own world, but also it was quite different to our world as well. And I think on this issue of war, there is a marked difference. And in actual fact, this was a democracy that was imperialist and bellicose and triumphalist and very, very dangerous. But I think that too can also be a lesson for the modern world as well, because I think we often are very complacent about democracy as a consequence of the development of a pro-peace discourse in Western democracies. We often think that peace is an essential feature of democracy, but I think the ancient Athenians show us quite clearly that that is not the case, and it is possible for there to be a militant democracy that enjoys attacking other people and which revels in war.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much, David. It was a pleasure to have you.
My pleasure.
And very best of luck with your research.
Thank you very much. Thank you again.
Look forward to reading all about it, or in more detail. So thank you.
Thank you very much.